Captured healer had 30 minutes to save a Lakota prince or watch the territory burn. The wind moved slowly across the wide plains, carrying dust and the smell of dry grass through the late afternoon air. Far away, dark clouds gathered near the mountains, promising rain that had not come for many weeks. The land felt tense, as if it was waiting for something to happen. A lone rider moved carefully across the open territory. The traveler was known in many places simply as the healer. He was not a soldier, not a trader, and not a man who belonged to one side or another. He carried saddlebags filled with herbs, simple tools, bandages, and worn notebooks where he wrote everything he learned during his long journeys. People from many communities knew him. Some trusted him because he never refused to help the sick or injured. Others watched him with caution because a man who walked between worlds was often seen as dangerous or unpredictable. But the healer believed that pain did not care about borders, and so he crossed them without hesitation. That day he had been riding toward a small settlement where a family had sent word that a child was ill. He planned to arrive before nightfall, but the weather changed quickly. The sky darkened and a strong wind began to blow. Dust lifted into the air, making it difficult to see. He slowed his horse, scanning the horizon. Something felt wrong. The plains were too quiet. Then he heard it, the distant sound of hooves. Before he could react, riders appeared from both sides, moving quickly and with clear purpose. They surrounded him without shouting or threatening, but their presence was strong enough to make escape impossible. The healer raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. The riders were Lakota warriors. Their faces were serious, their movements controlled. They studied him carefully, looking for signs of danger. One of them rode closer and examined the saddlebags filled with medical supplies. The healer spoke calmly, explaining who he was and where he was going. Some of the warriors listened, but they did not answer. Instead, they gestured for him to follow. He understood immediately that this was not a choice. The journey changed direction, heading away from the settlement and toward distant hills. The healer noticed the urgency in the riders' movements. They were not hunting or scouting. They were rushing. After some time, he realized they were not treating him like a prisoner in the usual way. They did not tie his hands or remove his tools. They watched him closely but allowed him to ride freely within the group. That made him think they needed something from him. As they rode, thunder rolled across the sky and light rain began to fall. The land smelled fresh, and the wind cooled slightly. Still, the tension among the riders did not ease. After several hours, they reached a hidden camp placed between hills and trees. Smoke rose from small fires, and people moved quickly between lodges. The moment the healer arrived, he felt the weight of many eyes watching him. Women paused their work. Children stood quietly beside elders. Warriors moved around the edges of the camp, alert and ready. The healer dismounted slowly. He noticed worry in every face. A man approached who carried himself with authority. His expression was strong, but tired. Through a translator, he spoke, "You are a healer." It was not a question. The healer nodded. "You will help someone," the man said. "You must." The healer agreed without hesitation. Helping the sick was the reason he traveled. They led him into a large lodge where the air felt heavy with heat and worry. Inside, a young man lay on blankets. He was strong in build, clearly someone important, but his face was pale and covered in sweat. His breathing came in shallow bursts, and his body trembled with fever. Several people sat nearby, watching silently. Among them was an older woman whose eyes were sharp and observant. She carried herself like someone respected by all. The healer approached slowly and knelt beside the injured man. He saw a wound near the side of the prince's body, not fresh, but swollen and angry. The skin around it was red and hot. He understood immediately that infection had begun to spread. The lodge remained silent as he examined the injury carefully. He could feel many eyes on him, waiting for answers. The translator spoke again. "This is the chief's son. He was hurt during fighting. He grows weaker. You have little time." The healer looked at the chief. The man's face showed strength but also deep fear. The fear of losing a child. "How long?" the healer asked. The chief answered through the translator, his voice steady but heavy. "You have 30 minutes to show that you can help him." The words were not spoken with anger, but with desperate urgency. The healer understood the meaning behind them. The prince's life was tied to more than family. If he died, grief and anger could lead to conflict that would spread across the territory. Outside the lodge, the sounds of movement grew louder. Warriors prepared for something. The healer realized that others expected trouble soon. He opened his saddlebags and removed clean cloth, herbs, and tools. His hands moved carefully, trying to remain calm despite the pressure. He spoke softly, asking questions about what had happened to the prince, how long ago he had been injured, what treatments had already been tried, what signs had appeared first. The older medicine woman answered some questions herself, surprising him. She explained the herbs they had used and the rituals they had performed to protect the prince's spirit. The healer listened respectfully, never dismissing her words. As he worked, he felt the tension slowly shift. The medicine woman watched him closely, judging not only his skill but his attitude. The healer realized that trust here would not come from words alone. It would come from respect. He examined the wound again and understood that he would need help from both knowledge systems, his own and theirs. The infection was dangerous but not beyond saving if treated quickly. Outside, thunder grew louder, and distant voices rose as scouts returned with news. The healer knew that the next moments would decide more than one life. He took a slow breath, preparing himself. Around him, the lodge waited in silence, filled with hope, fear, and the weight of an entire people's future resting on what he would do next. The healer wiped his hands slowly and looked again at the young prince lying on the blankets. The fever had not broken. Sweat covered the prince's forehead, and his breathing was still shallow. The air inside the lodge felt heavy, filled with worry and quiet prayers. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky again, and rain tapped softly against the lodge covering. Time felt like it was moving too fast and too slow at the same moment. The healer understood that the wound itself was not the only danger. The swelling and heat showed that infection had already begun to spread through the body. If nothing changed soon, the prince would grow weaker until his body could no longer fight. He turned toward the chief and spoke carefully through the translator. "The wound must be opened again," he said gently. "The sickness is trapped inside. If we do nothing, he will not survive." The words caused tension in the room. Some warriors shifted uneasily. Opening a wound again sounded dangerous, especially when the prince was already weak. The older medicine woman watched the healer closely. Her eyes were sharp, but not unfriendly. She asked several questions through the translator, wanting to understand what he planned to do and why. The healer explained each step slowly. He showed his tools and described how he would clean the wound and remove what was causing the fever. He also asked if they had certain herbs that could help reduce pain and swelling. When he asked for their herbs, surprise moved across several faces. They had expected him to rely only on his own methods. Instead, he showed respect for their knowledge. The medicine woman nodded slowly. She called for a younger helper to bring a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were dried plants and roots with a strong, earthy smell. The healer examined them carefully, recognizing some and learning about others as she explained their use. For the first time since he arrived, the tension between them softened slightly. They began to work together. The healer cleaned his tools carefully, using heated water. Every movement was slow and precise because he knew that even small mistakes could cause harm. The lodge remained silent except for the sound of rain and the prince's weak breathing. Outside, voices rose again as scouts returned. The chief stepped out briefly, leaving the healer and the medicine woman alone with the prince. The healer noticed that warriors stood closer to the lodge entrance now, their posture alert. Something was changing outside. The medicine woman spoke quietly, her voice calm but serious. She asked why the healer traveled between different people instead of staying with one community. He answered honestly. He told her that sickness did not belong to one group alone, and he believed helping anyone in need was the right path. She listened without interruption. After a moment, she nodded once as if confirming something she had already sensed. The healer prepared to begin. He placed clean cloth beneath the prince's side and gently removed old bandages. The wound looked worse than before, swollen and dark at the edges. He felt the weight of every eye watching him. He spoke softly to the prince, even though the young man could not hear clearly. Sometimes, hearing a calm voice helped the body remain steady. The medicine woman prepared a mixture of herbs and placed them nearby. She began a quiet chant, not loud enough to distract but strong enough to fill the space with purpose. The healer made the first careful movement, reopening part of the wound to allow infection to escape. Several people inhaled sharply, but no one interrupted. He worked slowly, allowing fluid to drain while cleaning the area gently. Minutes passed that felt much longer. He watched closely for signs that the prince's body was reacting badly, but instead he noticed small improvements. The breathing became slightly deeper. The tension in the muscles eased a little. Still, danger remained. Suddenly, the prince's body shook with a wave of fever, and his pulse raced. The healer paused, unsure if he had helped or made things worse. The medicine woman placed her hand lightly on the prince's forehead and continued her chant, steady and calm. The healer realized that this was the critical moment. He applied the herbal mixture she had prepared, combining it with his own methods. The smell filled the lodge, sharp and natural. Slowly, the prince's breathing began to settle again. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Thunder echoed across the hills like distant drums. The chief returned, his expression serious. He spoke quietly with another warrior before turning back toward the healer. Through the translator, he shared news. Soldiers had been seen moving closer to the territory. They believed trouble had begun and were preparing for confrontation. The healer felt a new layer of pressure. Saving the prince was not only about one life. It could change what happened between entire groups of people. He focused again on the work in front of him. He finished cleaning the wound and placed fresh bandages carefully, making sure they allowed air while protecting the injury. The medicine woman handed him another herbal paste, and together they secured it in place. When he finished, he leaned back slightly, exhausted but alert. The prince was still weak, but the fever no longer rose as sharply. It was too early to know if he would survive, but hope had returned where fear had been strongest. The healer explained that the next hours would be important. The prince needed rest, water, and careful observation. He showed them how to watch for changes in breathing and how to keep the wound clean. The medicine woman listened carefully, repeating the instructions to others in the lodge. Outside, the storm began to slow, leaving behind a quiet stillness. The camp felt different now, less frantic, more watchful. Some warriors who had looked at the healer with suspicion now nodded slightly in respect. Trust was not fully given, but it had begun to grow. The healer sat beside the prince, watching every small movement. He knew that the hardest part was not over. Infection could return, and the body might still fail. But for now, the prince was alive, and the path toward healing had begun. And as the night deepened around the camp, everyone waited, not only for recovery, but for what would come next when morning arrived. Night settled over the camp slowly, and the air became cooler after the rain. The fires outside burned low, their light flickering against the shapes of lodges and moving shadows. Inside the lodge, the healer remained beside the young prince, watching every small change with careful attention. The fever had not disappeared completely, but it was no longer rising as fast as before. The prince's breathing was deeper now, though still weak. Each breath felt like a small victory. The healer wiped sweat from his own forehead and leaned back slightly, allowing himself a moment to think. The first step had been taken, but the danger was far from over. Infection could return without warning, and the body might still fail if strength did not come back soon. The older medicine woman sat across from him, her posture calm and steady. She seemed to understand that healing was not only about medicine but also patience. Every few moments she checked the prince's pulse gently and listened to his breathing with quiet focus. Neither spoke much, yet a silent partnership had formed between them. Outside the lodge, Low voices drifted through the night. Warriors moved carefully around the camp, taking turns watching the surrounding hills. Scouts had returned with news that soldiers were still approaching the territory, though they had not yet reached the valley. The uncertainty hung over everyone like a heavy cloud. The healer felt the pressure growing again. Saving the prince could mean the difference between peace and conflict, but he forced himself to stay focused on the task before him. Thinking too far ahead would only lead to mistakes. A young helper entered quietly with warm water and fresh cloth. The healer thanked him and began to clean the prince's face gently. The skin felt cooler than before, and that gave him hope. Hours passed slowly. The firelight dimmed and some people outside began to rest, though many remained awake. Inside, the healer listened closely for any sign of change. Then, suddenly, the prince's body stiffened. His breathing grew uneven, and his pulse began to race again. The healer reacted immediately, checking the wound and the bandages. He feared that the infection was fighting back. The medicine woman leaned forward, placing her hand lightly on the prince's chest while speaking softly in her own language. The healer mixed another small portion of herbs with warm water and applied it carefully around the wound. He worked quickly, but with steady hands, refusing to let panic guide him. For several long moments, nothing changed. The air felt heavy again, filled with silent tension. Then slowly the prince's breathing began to settle. The healer let out a quiet breath he did not realize he had been holding. The medicine woman nodded slightly, her expression showing cautious approval. The crisis had passed, at least for now. Outside, the wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the smell of rain across the camp. The storm had cleared, leaving a sky filled with stars. Some warriors looked upward, as if searching for guidance in the quiet night. Inside the lodge, the chief entered silently. He sat beside his son without speaking, his strong hands resting on his knees. For a long time he simply watched the prince breathe. The healer explained softly that the prince had survived another dangerous moment, but the next hours remained important. The chief listened carefully and nodded once, showing both gratitude and deep concern. The medicine woman added her own thoughts, explaining that healing required balance between body and spirit. The chief listened to both perspectives equally, showing respect for each. As the night moved forward, the healer felt exhaustion creeping into his body. He had been working without rest for many hours, but he knew he could not sleep yet. At one point the prince moved slightly, his fingers twitching against the blanket. The healer leaned closer, watching carefully. A faint sound escaped the prince's lips, not clear words, but a sign that consciousness was slowly returning. Hope spread quietly through the lodge. A young warrior standing near the entrance smiled slightly for the first time since the healer had arrived. Others exchanged small glances, their tension easing just a little. The healer gave the prince a small amount of water, guiding it slowly so he would not choke. The prince swallowed weakly, but successfully. It was a small action, yet it felt important. Outside, dawn began to approach slowly, turning the sky from dark blue to soft gray. Birds called faintly in the distance, and the camp slowly came back to life. News spread quickly that the prince had survived the night. People moved with lighter steps, though caution remained. But new worry arrived soon after. The scout returned, speaking urgently to the chief. Through the translator, the healer learned that soldiers had moved closer than expected. They believed someone had been taken against their will and were preparing to enter the territory. The healer felt a deep weight settle in his chest. If they arrived at the wrong moment, misunderstanding could grow into something dangerous. The chief looked toward his son, then toward the healer. His expression showed that difficult decisions were coming. The healer understood that his role might soon extend beyond healing the body. He might need to help both sides understand what had truly happened. For now, however, he focused on the prince, who opened his eyes slightly for the first time. The gaze was weak and unfocused, but alive. The medicine woman smiled gently, whispering words of encouragement. The chief leaned forward, his strong voice softening as he spoke to his son. The healer stepped back slightly, allowing the family a moment together. Outside, the rising sun painted the plains with golden light, and for the first time since his capture, the healer felt that hope had truly begun to grow. Morning light spread slowly across the plains, turning the wet grass into shining silver under the rising sun. The camp felt different now. The fear that had filled the night had softened, replaced by cautious hope. Smoke rose from small fires as people began their daily tasks, though everyone moved with quiet awareness of what was coming. Inside the lodge, the healer watched the young prince carefully. The prince's eyes opened more often now, though he was still weak. His breathing had grown steadier, and the fever no longer burned as fiercely as before. Each small improvement felt like a step forward not only for one life, but for everyone in the camp. The chief sat nearby, calm but watchful. He spoke quietly with the medicine woman while the healer checked the wound again. The swelling had reduced slightly, and the redness around it had faded. It was not healed yet, but it was moving in the right direction. The healer explained that recovery would take time and patience. The chief listened carefully, then thanked him with a small nod that carried deep meaning. Trust, once fragile, had grown stronger. Outside, however, tension began to rise again. Scouts returned with urgent news. Soldiers had reached the edge of the valley. They were not attacking, but they were moving with caution, unsure of what they might find. Rumors had spread that a traveler had been taken, and misunderstandings were growing. The chief gathered several elders and warriors to speak together. The healer remained nearby, listening through the translator. Some believed they should prepare for defense, fearing that soldiers might arrive with suspicion and fear. Others argued that showing peace might prevent trouble before it began. The healer understood that one wrong action could change everything. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with respect. He explained that if the soldiers saw proof that the prince was alive and being treated, it might calm their fears. He suggested sending a messenger carrying a sign of peace. The suggestion caused quiet discussion. Some warriors hesitated. Trusting outsiders had not always brought good results in the past, yet the chief listened thoughtfully. After a long silence, the chief agreed to try a peaceful approach first. A messenger was chosen, a calm and respected warrior who could speak clearly and carry the chief's intentions. He would ride toward the soldiers and explain that the healer had come willingly to help, and that no harm had been done. As preparations were made, the healer returned to the lodge. The prince was awake again, though still weak. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but he asked for water and recognized his father. Relief moved through the room like warm sunlight. The healer helped him sit slightly, supporting his back with blankets. The prince listened as the chief explained what had happened and how close danger had come. The young man's expression showed both surprise and gratitude. The medicine woman prepared another herbal mixture to strengthen his body. She handed it to the healer, trusting him to give it at the right moment. Their partnership now felt natural, built on shared purpose. Outside, the messenger rode away across the plains, carrying hope that words might prevent fear from turning into conflict. Time passed slowly. The healer walked outside briefly, stretching his tired muscles. The air smelled clean after the rain, and the sky stretched wide and clear above the hills. Warriors stood at watch points, their eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the soldiers would appear. He could feel their nervous energy. Many had experienced moments when misunderstanding led to pain and loss. The healer understood that trust was fragile and needed careful care, just like a wound. As the sun climbed higher, distant shapes appeared near the valley entrance. The soldiers had arrived. They moved carefully, not rushing forward, but not retreating either. Their posture showed uncertainty. They expected danger, but were unsure where it would come from. The chief stood at the front of the camp with several elders beside him. The healer remained slightly behind, ready to help explain if needed. Minutes felt like hours as everyone waited. Then the messenger returned, riding quickly but calmly. He spoke to the chief, explaining that the soldiers had agreed to listen before taking any action. Relief moved through the group, though caution remained. A small group of soldiers approached slowly, leaving the rest behind at a distance. They stopped far enough to show respect, but close enough to speak. The healer stepped forward when asked. Through calm conversation and careful translation, he explained what had happened, how he had been brought to help the prince, how he had chosen to stay and treat the injury, and how both sides had worked together. The soldiers listened carefully. Their expressions softened when they learned that the prince was recovering, and that no harm had come to the healer. One soldier asked if he could see the prince to confirm. The chief agreed after a moment's thought, allowing a small group to enter the camp under watchful eyes. Inside the lodge, the soldiers saw the prince resting peacefully. The tension that had filled the air slowly faded. The sight of healing instead of conflict changed their expectations. Outside, conversations continued. The healer spoke about cooperation and understanding, reminding both sides that fear often came from not knowing the truth. Slowly, the atmosphere changed from confrontation to cautious respect. The chief and the soldiers' leader spoke for a long time. They discussed boundaries, misunderstandings, and the importance of avoiding unnecessary trouble. The healer watched quietly, realizing that the prince's recovery had created an opportunity for something rare. Peaceful conversation where conflict might have begun. As the afternoon light softened, the soldiers began to withdraw. They promised to report that the situation had been resolved and that no threat existed. The camp felt lighter once they left. The healer returned to the lodge and found the prince resting more comfortably than before. The medicine woman smiled faintly, showing that she believed the worst had passed. As evening approached again, the healer realized that what had started as a moment of fear had turned into something much larger, a chance for understanding between people who rarely trusted each other. The evening sun slowly lowered behind the hills, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and orange. The camp felt quieter now, as if it had taken a deep breath after many days of tension. The healer stood near the lodge entrance, watching the light move across the plains while thinking about everything that had happened since his arrival.
Only a short time ago, fear had filled every corner of the camp.
Now there was cautious peace. The soldiers had withdrawn, and no signs of conflict remained on the horizon. The sound of laughter from children returning to their games felt like a reminder that life was continuing again. Inside the lodge, the young prince rested against folded blankets. His face looked stronger than before, and the fever that had once threatened his life had faded into weakness that could be healed with time. The wound still needed care, but the danger had passed. The healer checked the bandages once more, moving slowly and gently. The prince watched him with clear eyes now, no longer lost in fever. Though his voice remained soft, he spoke with quiet strength. "You stayed," the prince said through the translator. "You did not leave when it was hard." The healer smiled slightly. He did not know how to answer such words, so he simply nodded. Helping people had always felt like the natural path to him, yet here it had meant much more than he expected. The chief entered the lodge and sat beside his son. He looked at the healer with deep respect. There were no long speeches or grand gestures, only a quiet understanding that something important had changed between them. Outside, preparations began for a small gathering. It was not a celebration in a loud or joyful sense, but a moment to recognize survival and unity. The healer felt honored when he was invited to sit with the elders and share food with the community. As night came, fires were lit and people gathered together. Stories were spoken, some serious and some filled with gentle humor. The healer listened carefully, learning more about their traditions and history. The medicine woman sat beside him, occasionally explaining meanings he did not fully understand. Their partnership had grown into something deeper than simple cooperation. They had worked together under pressure, combining different ways of healing without competing against each other. The healer realized that he had learned as much from her as she had from him. Later, the chief stood and spoke to the gathered people. His voice was calm and steady, carrying across the quiet circle. He spoke about courage, about trust, and about how strangers could become allies when they chose understanding instead of fear. Though the healer did not understand every word, he felt the meaning clearly when many people turned toward him with respectful expressions. After the gathering ended, the healer walked alone for a while, looking up at the stars. The plains felt vast and peaceful again. He thought about the path that had brought him here, a path filled with uncertainty but also purpose. The next morning he prepared to leave. The prince insisted on coming outside to see him off, supported by a younger warrior. Though still weak, he stood tall, showing strength and gratitude. The medicine woman handed the healer a small bundle of herbs as a gift, explaining how they could be used during future journeys. The chief approached to ask. He offered the healer a simple token, a small piece of crafted leather marked with a symbol of protection. It was not a grand reward, but it carried deep meaning. "You came as a stranger," the chief said through the translator. "You leave as someone remembered." The healer felt a quiet emotion rise inside him. He had never sought recognition, yet these words meant more than any payment. As he mounted his horse, many people gathered to watch. There were no loud goodbyes, only respectful nods and soft smiles. He began to ride away slowly, turning once to look back at the camp. Smoke rose gently into the morning sky, and the sounds of daily life continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet he knew that something important had changed, not only for the prince or the tribe, but for himself. The journey ahead felt different now. He carried new understanding about cooperation and respect between cultures that often struggled to trust each other. Days later, when he reached another settlement, stories had already begun to spread. People spoke about a healer who had crossed dangerous territory and helped prevent conflict through patience and compassion. Some details changed as the story traveled, but the heart of it remained true. Years passed, and the young prince grew into a strong leader, known for seeking peace whenever possible. He remembered clearly the time when his life had depended on someone from outside his world, someone who had chosen healing over fear. The healer continued traveling across the plains, helping wherever he was needed. Sometimes he thought about the camp and the people he had met there. He carried the small leather token with him always, a reminder that even during uncertain times, understanding could build bridges stronger than suspicion. And though many stories faded with time, this one remained. Not because of conflict or danger, but because it showed how courage and respect could change the course of a territory without raising a single weapon. The plains remained wide and unpredictable, but somewhere within them lived the memory of a healer, a prince, and a moment when peace was chosen over fear.